This coming August, it'll be 16 years since my father passed away. And I mark that time easily because it was 8 days before our youngest daughter was born that he suddenly passed. Our oldest, though we have a picture of my father and her together, has obviously no recollection. She was only 3 years apart from her younger sister, so at that time doesn't have a recollection of my father. So over the years, I would attempt to do my best because I always felt a certain sadness that my father, though I believe he met my youngest from a spiritual perspective in his departure and her entrance, never got to experience her in this reality. And also both my kids. I mean, he got to experience our oldest, a little bit, but not very much. So over the years, I've always tried to find ways to bring my father to life for them, because it was always one of the things that I felt most sad about, was that they never had a chance to know my dad. So I would tell stories, and when they were younger, I could tell they were listening. There was a level of interest. Sometimes they would ask certain questions. And as they get older, and I would tend to repeat the same stories because I wanted to keep bringing him to life to them. I get the eye rolls and so forth. And then they moved into teenage years, and then it's all over. And then at some point, I imagine in their future, they'll have questions or wonder about their grandfather. They're just in a different space now as teenagers. But I had a really interesting experience the other day. We were up in the LA area, and I was meeting a childhood buddy of mine, one of my dearest and closest friends, for coffee early, 7 a.m. My wife was having some surgery on her eye, and I was with my youngest, and she said, "Do you mind if I go?" And of course, you could sit with us and hang out with us. I loved it. I loved the idea of it. But we sat down, and my buddy started talking. I made some kind of comment to my friend about the jacket he was wearing, and making an old reference to the fact that there was a brand that exists that I doubt it exists now, but back in the 70s, right, called Members Only. I don't know, maybe it's still out there. And my dad had one of every color of those jackets, these lightweight jackets. So that was the joke that, as you get older, you start thinking, oh, that's a good looking jacket. But he was wearing a jacket that sort of looked like it, but not really. But I couldn't let it go, so I had to make a joke, and I just said, is that a members only jacket? He started laughing. And he turned to my daughter, and he just started to rip. Your grandfather, and he just kind of went on and on talking about my dad. And tears well up now thinking about it, but it was such a touching time to listen. And I saw her listening to him in a way that she hadn't listened to me about my dad for a very long time. And I suddenly kind of zeroed in on it because I'm thinking, well, is it the other perspective that she's getting to hear, that I wasn't just telling a tale about how wonderful my dad was, but that she was actually hearing it from somebody that she loved and cared about, who was separate and apart from the family and telling stories. But I paid really close attention to the words he was using, because I love words. Love words. And the meaning that gets attached to them. And he didn't say anything so out of the ordinary. There wasn't any description that was unusual to anything that I had said, but it was said differently. The tone was different. His look was different. His perspective was different. And the words he used were different. And I could see my daughter laughing, and I could see her smiling, and I could just see her light up. And it just touched me so deeply. And I started thinking about how powerful words are to us in our language, perhaps in other languages as well. But just the idea, the meaning that we attach to words, and how that meaning can shift and change over time. How uh, the association that we have with a word, how that can stimulate us on a mental level, an emotional level, and a physiological level. How words can trigger us, how words can uplift us. And I realize, we speak so many of the same words, yet often there's a different definition that we hold towards that word because we have a different orientation to it. We have a different orientation to it because of the experiences of our lives. We were taught words and we were taught the meaning of those words through other people, through our parents, through family members, through our schooling, whatever the circumstances may be, but we had the association of what those words meant. And then we also had our own interpretation of them. Sometimes the way things that were described to us were not with words, but with images or experiences. And then we decided at a fairly young age what that must mean. Because I always say, if we don't know what things mean, we probably don't get out of bed in the morning to know that the world is safe enough to do so. But we project, just as others project onto us, their definition of what words mean to them. And I realize that's where so much collaboration comes in, but also a lot of confusion. Because we start to make the assumption that our definition of a word is somebody else's definition of a word, and sometimes it very well may be. It's almost the interpretation if you look at and watch a movie, or you read a book and then you find out the movie's coming out and you can't wait because those words are going to come alive. But now those words have been taken out of your own creative mind, your own images that you have of what it must look like, what it must sound like. And now it's coming out of somebody else's mouth. And now it's in a setting that maybe doesn't look exactly like you imagined it would look, or thought it looked, or it looked. And sometimes you walk away from that movie and you go, yeah, I don't know. I think I like the book better because you were left to your own imagination. You were left to your own definition of what things meant. The words that were used, the way those words were used. There's a story I was told one time of in the art of screenwriting, which is a part of my background from years ago. That if you have a guy who's leaning up against a wall and he's about to kiss a woman and he says, "I love you." You know I love you, don't you? And then you have that same kind of scenario, but he's up against a wall with a woman. He's got a gun to her head or a knife to her throat. And he says, "You know I love you, don't you?" Suddenly those words don't resonate the same. They don't mean the same. Their intention isn't the same. And yet what causes such challenges in our lives is the lack of communication or the misinterpretation or misunderstanding of words that were used because we prescribe our definition to them. Coach a lot of people, entrepreneurs, and they're looking for people to join them and myself included in this. And we hear things that people say like, "Oh man, I'm all in. I'm all in." Now each of us has a different definition, somewhat similar, but slightly different definition of what that might look like. One person's all in may be 5 hours a week, dedicated time, consistent, solid time. Another person's all in is 24/7, the grind. So the person who thinks it's the grind hears from somebody who says they're all in, and they project onto them their definition of it. And then suddenly that person's definition was 5 hours, and then therein lies the disappointment. I thought they were all in. I guess not. Yes, by whose definition? What are the words that are used that trigger us inside, that stimulate us inside, or that create a red flag inside and our ability to then process through that? So the person who hears all in and projects their image of 24/7 and it doesn't happen, then all of a sudden starts to doubt themselves. All of the stuff that's going on inside of them that makes them think that maybe they can't do this starts to surface. And what they reveal in that process is they don't have an inside game. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think that's a great awareness. I think that's a great opportunity to be able to create a shift inside someone's life. And there's other words. People say, I love you. Just the example I used before. You know I love you, don't you? Well, what is your definition of love? We've all been raised somewhat differently. Some have idealized versions of what love is. They project that onto people. And it's very different for other people because their version of love isn't the same. And therein lies the disappointment. So we say things like all in. We say things like I love you. I had a coaching call years ago, a phone coaching call with a complete stranger. I was working for John Gray's company, Ask Mars Venus. And the woman said, my boyfriend told me he loved me and I haven't heard from him now in 2 weeks. I'm like, oh, I hear that must be challenging. May I ask when the last time you saw him? She goes, well, we haven't met yet. We met online. They hadn't even met yet. They knew each other just a couple weeks and they spoke online and he said, I love you. She interpreted based upon her vision or version of what love is, even at 2 weeks in. And now was racked with all these horrible feelings inside because all that gets stirred inside of her is maybe I'm not unlovable after all. Man, it was 2 weeks. Some people think they fall in love immediately. Other people go, well, I think it's something that develops over time. Not just here to say who's right and who's wrong, but isn't it fascinating? Isn't it fascinating? Other people use words and they think they're really a strong communicator, but they're actually using words, finding out what your definition of those words are, and then using those words to get what they want. Well, communicating to get what you want isn't as much communication as it is manipulation. We're literally using someone else's definition of a word and manipulating that to get what we want. And then when that disappointment hits and we realize that person actually did, well, I thought they were my friend. I thought we were friends. Well, what's your definition of friend? Most people who sit around and say, oh, this person's my friend, this person's my friend, in a lot of situations, they're just really, if you want to break it down, in a lot of people's views would say they're really just friendly. They have a cordial relationship, respectful relationship. They know a little bit about each other. Other people wouldn't say that. Oh, well, we're friendly. Oh, a buddy of mine. A buddy of mine. What does that mean? Oh, you assume when you hear a buddy of mine, you think somebody's good friends with them. That isn't necessarily true. It's how we define it. And where we trip ourselves up in communication and where we activate a lot of this stuff, that inside stuff that gets triggered, that brings up the hurt, is because of that projection of our own definition, the assumption that someone else, when they say the words, must mean what I mean when I say those words. No. That's not how it rolls. That's not how it rolls. So it's a very powerful opportunity in a lot of ways for people to not only work on their inside game, to fortify themselves because they really feel confident and good about the words that they're using, but they also learn that one of the best ways not to trigger and bring up and drudge up, constantly drudging up old stuff, is to sometimes have a level of conversation, a slowing down of the conversation and communication, so that there is greater clarity, so that there is less room for misunderstanding or misinterpretation, so there is less room for disappointment. For people who are genuinely communicating, but simply have a different definition of the word than you do, than I do. So I would ask people, see, people would say to me, they go, Mitch, I don't get it. They said they were all in. They said they were all in. And God, I can't get them to do this. I can't get. And I said, well, hold on a second. I said, well, what does all in look like to you? Well, I said, no, I don't know. I have my definition, but I want to ask you your definition of all in. Well, I mean, I don't look at a clock, and I I don't know for a Friday from a Sunday to a Tuesday. Like it's all the same to me. Like it's always there. It's always around me. I'm always doing something. I'm always involved in it, even if I'm with my kids or my family. I might have to take a call. I might have to do this. I go, okay. So that's all into you is meaning it's like all encompassing. Like you're going for it. You want to make a lot of money and you're willing to put in and invest the time and energy to do so, regardless of what that takes. Yeah, that's all in. And I said, well, that's interesting. So I took the time to ask you what all in looks like. So rather than be disappointed, rather than start to trigger yourself and go through the spiral and start to turn this on yourself, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get anybody to do anything? Why do people say they're all in and they're really not? Why don't you do what I just did with you? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I go, did you ever ask the person? It sounds like you didn't, but did you ever consider asking the person when they said I'm all in? Did you consider asking them, say, hey, I have my definition of all in. I'm curious what that looks like to you so that we can develop a really strong, honest working relationship and a highly communicative one out the gate. No, I never did that. I just assumed. I said, well, there you go. I said, don't get me wrong. I said, what you're talking about, what you're sharing with me is not uncommon. I deal with this all the time. I deal with this all the time. I sometimes get caught up in it and I have to slow the conversation. I go, hold on a second. Can I ask you a question? Point of clarity. What does all in look like for you? Just so I'm clear. Now here's the beauty of it. See, if their definition is different than yours, you may still choose to be disappointed, but I would say you have a better opportunity rather than be disappointed. Instead, be grateful because now you know what all in looks like to them. Now you know how to work with them. Now you know that 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, 6 o'clock on a Monday night, they're bathing their kids, they're feeding their kids, they're out with their friends, whatever that is. You know if it's okay to leave a message and to know that maybe perhaps they might not get back to you instantly. Maybe that it's 24 hours later. Maybe it's the next morning. Maybe it's after 9 o'clock. I have people who leave voice messages, and I think this is so brilliant. They'll leave voice messages on their phone that say, if you're reaching me between 4 and 7, I've picked up the kids from school. We're getting them fed, getting them bathed, and getting them ready for bed. Please feel free to leave a message. If it's an emergency, please contact and somebody else that they know because they asked the question, would you be willing to take calls for me during this time? Yes, great. If it's an emergency, please contact so-and-so and they'll be happy to direct. If not, just leave a message and I'll get back to you within whatever that is, a couple hours, 24 hours, 12 hours, 8 hours. It doesn't matter. It's clarity. It's clarity. So when somebody says, I love you, when somebody says, I'm all in, when somebody says, I'm a leader, another one where there's hundreds of different definitions of what a leader looks like and sounds like and talks like and behaves like. And the disappointment, once again, is projecting what we believe a leader does or doesn't do. I've heard people say, well, a leader does this. I go, okay, you say so. But sometimes we have to change the words. I'm not a big fan of the word. I think the word leader, for instance, the word leader is overused. Are you a leader? Oh, he's a leader. Oh, she's a leader in our group. Oh, she loves to lead. Well, I don't know what that means. So I may say to them, well, what does that mean to you? And then sometimes I just change it up completely. They go, oh, I hear you're one of the top leaders. I said, well, I'm a really effective guide. You can call me a guider. Like, what? I go, yeah. I guide people to information, to greater understanding, through examples and wisdom that I have over the years. I guide people on how to be able to be more effective in what it is that they want to accomplish. Because to me, that's what a leader does. A leader is a guide. All ego aside, a leader learns how to guide people to where they want to go. So instead of bring up the word leader because I know it's going to trigger a million definitions, I use my own word. I'm a guider. And that challenges somebody to say to me, what's a guider? And then I get to tell them. So sometimes it's helping yourself to understand that how you once defined a word is different now. Over time, raising your level of consciousness, developing a strong and powerful inside game, you realize certain words don't work for you, certain words trigger you, certain words upset you, certain words are confusing, so you develop and change the words. Or you challenge people and get greater clarity around what the word means to them so that you're on the same page, and then you're able to share, hey, well, this is what it means to me, so I'm not going to project what I think it is. I just need to know what you think it is so I can best support you under those guidelines because I'm a guider. So truth be told, my buddy didn't use any crazy words. He didn't need to reinvent language. He spoke from his heart. He shared words about my father that lifted my daughter up, that made her smile, that shifted her energy, that brought tears to my eyes. Words are so powerful. So don't be afraid to seek the clarity. Don't be afraid to reframe, to come up with a completely different word. It doesn't matter. What we want to do is we want to have a greater understanding. And if you're growing in consciousness over time and you're working on your inside game and you have an inside game plan strategy that you're working with, then what you're doing is you're creating the opportunity to better define, to better clarify what it is that you want, what it is that you need, and to better understand what other people want and need so you can rise to the occasion and support them. I'm Mitch Newman. We'll see you again next time.